Morning, everyone. Absolutely wonderful to come back, keep coming back to Pondicherry. It's like a family. You have your younger sister, Gloria, elder sister, Alo. Don't mind that, Alo. That was paid for. That comment was paid for by Gloria. No, but absolutely wonderful to see, especially on a Sunday morning, such a wonderful audience. And I hope we can do justice to the topic that we've been given. And of course, with my great friend Vikram, who, by the way, I was calculating, in the last 2 months, he's traveled to 24 cities. This is the 25th city. So this is a real Bharat Jodo Yatra. The other one was Bharat Todo Yatra. This one is... And you can see the resemblance to the youth icon that, No, but Vikram, let me start off straight away with setting up of narratives, because I think that's one theme that is seems very pertinent to a lot of people. But before we talk of setting of narratives, we have to talk of the kind of narratives that were thrust upon us over the last 70 years. Now, do you think India has been an exception in the setting up of narratives, fiction or non-fiction, and then we'll come slowly and kind of disentangle fiction from non-fiction? But a lot of nations who've gained independence, and India being one, if we chart our journey in the last 70 years, do you think there has been a deliberate attempt to set a particular narrative or just let things be? I think that's a question that needs answering before we delve more into it.
Right. Very good morning, everyone, and I'm really broken the jinx with Pondi Lit Fest. This is third time lucky, and every time somehow just before the Pondi Lit Fest I would either fall sick or there would be some emergency in the family, and so this time I ensured that come what may, even if it had to be on a stretcher, I would come here and actually speak at the Lit Fest. I'm glad I'm at least not in that condition. Anand actually has conned me into this session. This is supposed to be an individual session of every person who needs to talk about their books, and Anand, who's in addition to the many hats that he wears, other than of course beaming into our drawing rooms every night, demolishing narratives in his own way by asking for those extra 30 seconds, which goes on and on for several minutes, much to the dismay and also amazement of the poor hapless anchor, was supposed to do this single-handedly because he's also a novelist. I don't know how he manages in just 24 hours in a day. He has some wonderful research papers in science which he publishes. He's so any topic, whether it's politics, economics, he's there with an answer each night. But in addition, he's also written these lovely novels, including a latest mystery thriller, Souffle, which I would strongly recommend all of you must read. And ideally, this should have been a session where he's talking about his book. So why I said I've been conned into it is he's made this into a conversation so that he doesn't have to talk much about his book, and rather all of you should buy and read it. So I see the very hideous kind of agenda that a Punjabi who tries to masquerade as a Tamilian in Tamil land, claiming the sweet from my part of the country, which is Mysore Pak, I'm sorry, but tries to do. But Anand, to your question, I think that's, and particularly in the discipline that I write on, which is history, there has been, of course, an attempt to hegemonize and also impose a kind of narrative. History as a discipline, I've always stated, is something which thrives on multiplicity of views. There has to be multiple viewpoints, differences of opinion, a healthy discussion, debates, dissent, and so on. But and the sad part was, even under colonial rule in British India, when someone like Mill wrote his History of British India, where he rubbished every aspect of Indian history, Indian culture, and so on. Even at the heights of colonial rule, we had, particularly from Maharashtra, a lot of historians who wrote anonymously because they were under British rule. You couldn't openly bring out rebuttals, but the first Hindu, Hindoo, the second Hindu, the third Hindu. So these rebuttals kept getting published in various publications. That in a way gave rise to what is known as the nationalist school of historiography in India. I really don't know whether there's a right, left. This is a very false divide in a country like India. I would rather say it's a nationalist and an anti-national narrative. So the nationalist historiography that came around at that time, as I said, starting with a lot of people from Maharashtra, V.K. Rajwade, Bhandarkar and others, it thrived and then grew. And Bengal, of course, being the intellectual hub, also caught on to it. So ideally, and that's the saddest part, that after independence, this entire school, the manner in which it was ruthlessly suppressed, only to ensure there was a certain political narrative which had to be furthered, and the historian actually became a chef, where the ruler actually says, I want a dish to be prepared this way with so much of salt and so much of whatever. And that is how the historian ultimately started cooking and cutting to size what the ruler asked him or her to do. And we all know that famous episode, even someone as celebrated as Dr. R.C. Majumdar, who was at the head of an entire committee to write about the history of the freedom movement, appointed by Jawaharlal Nehru's government, made it amply clear that this is not going to be court history. And he's going to dispassionately analyze every aspect of the freedom movement, including the strong reservations he had about Gandhi and his role in the freedom movement itself, for which he was summarily, deposed from the committee. And someone who had very little to do with modern Indian history. I think he was an IAFS officer dealing with Iranian, art and all of that. This person was actually made in charge of the official government project of what the history of the freedom struggle was supposed to be. So this kind of subtly gave also a clue to all other existing historians that if you have to survive in this ecosystem, if you have to actually be accepted, then you will have to toe that line. And so anybody who went against the grain, including R.C. Majumdar or Sitaram Goyal, Ram Swaroop, Dharampal, so many others. I mean, the kind of price that they had to pay, with their careers being at stake, fellowships, being denied to them, and literally nobody reading them. We did not even have a blue ink then which could publish them and bring these narratives out. So I think in this war of narratives, it has been a constant struggle for the nationalist school of historiography to emerge and make its point. But I think, Anand, it's the same when it comes to the world of fiction as well, isn't it? Because all the kind of stories in the last several decades which actually win any kind of acclaim abroad are the ones which disparage India. Whether it's even novels, whether it's even films which win all kinds of international awards, are the ones which actually show India in a very poor light. Slumdog Millionaire, I mean, not any other thing. So what is your take as a novelist, that how has fiction kind of been monopolized by a particular tone and tenor of a narrative which has been set, and who has set that?
Yeah, so first of all, let me clarify that yes, you're absolutely right that each of the authors is supposed to take time to talk about his or her book, but I'm absolutely petrified, especially if the book that I have written is a thriller, to talk about it, because lest it, I may give away not just the plot, but a few things. And there's a wonderful short story. I can't remember who's written it. It's called The Last Page, and it is. So the story begins by a guy who rings a bell of a house, and someone opens it and says, "Did you, take this book from the library?" And the lady said, "Yes." He says, Who killed? Who was the killer?" The last page was torn. So, like that, I don't want to give the plot away. And it's, if you, for example, write, let's say, fiction, which is, and here is where I think we can come to the topic. Fiction which is very finely intertwined or entangled with non-fiction. which is the kind of genre you can say that Naipaul kind of really pioneered, then it is easy to talk about the thing, you know. But if it's a simple murder mystery that is contemporary, that's got nothing to do, it can have a sprinkling of, you know, the contemporary themes, politics or whatever, but largely you don't want to give the anything away from the thing. So, that's the reason why I thought a discussion like this would possibly help the audience much more in trying to understand the thing. As to the question you've asked, you're absolutely right, but let me throw it back at, I mean, you know Anand Math. Now, Anand Math is a novel, you know, but I would say in more ways than one, it is more of a non-fictional treatise than you would actually think of it as a novel, because it's so unbelievably, or realistically, let's put it this way, kind of gives a glimpse of essentially what India was at that point of time. I mean, it's not, you can say it's a fictional story or whatever, but, you know, I mean, the things from, you still get goosebumps thinking about. So, I mean, I took the example of Naipaul, but there were many, even Indians before Naipaul, who were, intertwining fiction with non-fiction, or the themes or the symbolism of it. I mean, at one level, it is a very symbolic thing. So, do you think the setting up of a narrative through a non-fictional stream is more powerful than a fictional stream? I mean, I asked this because I took the example of Anand Math. There are so many more, where, you know, you want to rouse the readers, you want to rouse the national population, the conscience of it. What is more rousing? Let's say an explanation or a description or elaboration of, let's say, a political figure, or weaving a story around that person and rousing. So,
but before we get there, I want to ask you a very more fundamental question.
Yeah.
Is this whole divide of fiction and non-fiction, it's a very non-Indic kind of a construct, because in our scheme of things, I don't think there was something that there's a non-fiction stream, there's a fiction stream, including in the writing of history. The quote that is often attributed to Kalhana and in the Rajatarangini, where he says, Dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesha samanvitam kathayuktam puravrittam itihasam ta chakshmate. Puravrittam, or the narratives of the past, which are told to you in a kathayuktam, in a story form, which also have a very essential upadesha samanvitam. There has to be a didactic element, there has to be a moral instruction to society about what is good, what is bad, and all of that. And in the attainment of the four purusharthas of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, that is called itihasa, and itihasa too is translated very vaguely, it thus happened. And our Puranas and the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are collectively called the Itihasa Puranas, have just this. I mean, it's not just a dry documentation of facts like how the Western mind probably looked at history or documentation. It was embellished in a lot of storytelling. And we are a land of storytellers and kathakars. Over thousands of years, we have embellished the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, with so many narratives from different parts of India. It was almost the whole country was sitting and writing a story, a magnificent magnum opus or an epic, which had these different stories in it. But even if you go to the Mahabharata and you have the Bhishma Parva, where there are, I think, about 70 verses which talk in detail about the ethnography of India, the geography of the country itself, the different communities which were there in different parts, who were the people who came from outside to the Yavanas and the Shakhas and the Mlechas, and there's description of all of that. So how does one categorize that as non-fiction or fiction? This is a very English Western construct, because I think in the Indian imagination, all these, every field, whatever it is, whether it was mathematics, whether it was the sciences, or even history, it was all written in a kavya or a mahakavya format. The entire role of the kavi as a great drashta, or somebody who's a seer, like probably what Sanjay was doing in the middle of the Mahabharata war, sitting with Dhritarashtra, but actually able to see what was going on. This whole poet, the elevation of a poet from, so a poet in an English literature would just be a fiction, you categorize him there. But in the Indian imagination, a poet was so important. A historian also needed to be a poet. A mathematician also, wrote all his treatises in a poetry form. The Sulba Sutras, which apparently give us the Pythagoras theorem, if you go there, you wouldn't directly find, the square of the hypotenuse is the sum of the squares of the other two sides of a right angle. It will be in the form of a poetry.
So let me put you in a
So
corner.
where is I was putting you in the corner. But where is your entire premise of this topic itself, fiction versus non-fiction? I think collapses when it comes to the Indian context.
To a very large extent, you're absolutely right. But then, do you believe when you talk of fiction being interwoven with non-fiction in our texts? So, do you believe Ramayana has fictional parts of it?
Of course, there has to be, because all of them. I mean, including the Rajatarangini, which even Western, scholars call him as the only credible historian of India, the first historian Kalhana. But they have M.A. Stein, who has translated the Rajatarangini. He said there are lots of fantastic stories, which there are. I mean, it is written in this hyperbole. It's a lot of exaggeration, and that's what makes it very readable and interesting. And maybe the joy of non-fiction has somehow evaporated only because we have not brought, and particularly history, which is taught and read in such a boring manner. In a country like this, where we revel in stories and storytelling and all of that, it's quite a sad commentary that we don't look at it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. I think the issue has a lot to do with the way the contemporary readers, they like to judge a work. I think they're a lot less indulging than they were maybe even 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. This interweaving of fiction with non-fiction right now, even in a tweet, you weave fiction with non-fiction and you're absolutely pilloried. It says, hey, where is the data? How dare you bring in a story? Just give me the points, know. So when you say, that's the reason why I asked you. The reason why Ramayana and Mahabharata have gone into the hearts of billions of people is because of the story part of it.
True. True. But that doesn't take away the truth or the historical, which, if you might want to call the non-fiction part of that that text, that is equally important for the common
which
masses.
Part of Ramayana is non-fictional, do you think?
Everything, including, Professor B.B. Lal, who conducted a series of archaeological excavations on various, sites related to the Ramayana, or the dating of the Ramayana. People like Dr. Manish Pandit, who have been doing a lot of work on dating the Mahabharata war as to when that actually happened, using astronomy and, on the 18 days of the war, which nakshatra was in which, stage and what was...
Oh, so you don't believe in the Romila Thapar thing that Mahabharata came after?
Well...
You knew that was coming.
I do believe in the fact that I think Yudhishthira was inspired by Ashoka and so on, but I don't believe in the other things that that school of historiography says.
The next step was Yudhishthira was a product of Ashoka University. I think that's... But you see what I mean? When you have glorious interweaving of fiction with non-fiction, in contemporary times or polarized times or whatever, I hate to use that word, but it's a beautiful word. I think people should be polarized. There is truth and there are lies. So, you have to be polarized. People have almost completely discarded the storytelling part of it. So for example, let's take Savarkar, there is absolutely nothing which is fictional about those two books that you have written on Savarkar. Were you to put in a fictional story, as it is, this fellow is pilloried so much, you would be completely hung from the nearest lamppost.
True. No, I think the genre that I love to write on, which is biography, I think it comes closest among all historical subgenres to the whole, literary-minded writing. And I'll explain why. Because, I often liken a biography or the process of writing a biography to a love affair. You fall in love with an individual. There is the first instance is you fall in love with the person. You're enchanted. If you hate the person, of course, that is also an agenda. You can write a biography of someone you hate, whom you want to pull down. But then generally you're enchanted. It need not be like itself. You're just enchanted by the enigma that that person presents. And then just as it happens in a common mundane love affair, you start chasing, stalking your love interest. You every letter that your subject has written, you start rummaging, and you probably get to know more about your subject than the subject knew about themselves, because you have a 360-degree view of their life. And their friends become your friends, their enemies almost subconsciously somewhere become, as Freud said, it's a kind of a transference that happens with the subject and the biographer, who is in a relatively unwooable condition, but still it's a love affair that proceeds. And just as it happens even in love, sometimes there is a breakup also in the process of the journey itself, where you're disillusioned with the character. You say, oh, I don't think I did the right thing in investing my time and emotion in it, and you drop it. But if you actually carry it forward and actually, start committing it to print, the biggest, ask of a biographer is to cut off those emotional cords from the subject. Because there is a very, very thin line between a biography and a hagiography. And that is the toughest task, because for several years you're invested emotionally and otherwise in that subject. But while writing to it, you're suddenly asked to become a neutral bystander and almost become, morally very distinct from the person, present them with warts and all, and that is how a biography becomes an honest biography.
When you, and very beautifully said, that writing a biography and, talk of Savarkar is almost like a love affair, you say, with the person you are writing. So your next book is on Tipu Sultan.
Yes, it is a love affair. It is a love affair with him as well. Right. Though, I mean, sartan se juda ho jayega if that happens. But then, that's why I think I corrected
that. I mean,
myself.
Your position on Tipu is very clear. In fact, one of the first definitive articles that I read that exposed Tipu was by Vikram in Mint, if I'm not mistaken, where you talked about Mandaya Iyengar not celebrating Tipu Jayanti even now, because on that day he hung 700 of them. So, I mean, with Savarkar, I can understand, there was this kind of enthusiasm. The person was an enigma before you unraveled him. You spent 5 years writing those 2 volumes. So I can understand how closely associated you felt with him. But would the same thing be with Tipu, or would would it be the same?
No, I think he is as much an enigma, and he intrudes our contemporary discourse all the time. In the state that I come from, there was a perverse attempt to do a Tipu Jayanti and so on, which was very, very pernicious according to me. So I think these are enigmatic figures. And Anand, to the earlier point that I was trying to make, I think Virginia Woolf, in her essay called The Art of Biography in 1931 or so, she had called biography as the most restrictive of all arts. Because a biographer is very, very similar to the tools and techniques that a novelist would employ, because you need to go into the heart of the character, you need to psychoanalyze them, you need to actually understand their motivations, you need to do all of that. But at the same time, a biographer is, I think, an artist under oath, where you can't make up things like a novelist might do. If you find blank spaces in the story of the person, because nobody documents their life completely, we would also leave the darkest chapters of our life undocumented so that it dies with us. So in those cases, a biographer is called upon to make conjectures, somehow connect the various things, which is where the novelist the person...
You never felt like taking that license, if I may use that word, of, not being...
This is turning out to be an interview of me. I'm supposed to be interviewing you.
It's the same thing, it's...
No, but tell me...
it's a pleasure interviewing Rahul Gandhi of the Bharat Jodo Yatra. So it's not
I know this is a revenge for the Mysore Park defeat, but then that's fine. But don't you think your tribe is the one responsible for this, which is what you actually do for a living, which is a scientist, which have actually percolated the humanities and this whole empiricist model of positivism in history, Leopold von Ranke, where everything you need empirical evidence to actually deduce.
Yes.
Do you think that has spoiled the humanities writing in general and history in particular?
Yes, and I think that's a great question, because let's think about this. let's say you were to weave in a story, whatever angle it might be, from the character of Savarkar into this. I mean, I'm just juxtaposing Mahabharata, let us say, or Ramayana, where you said non-fiction is intertwined so beautifully with fiction. You would be taken to the cleaners, you know. But on the other hand, if you were to say that, look, this is the book I have written, just read this book, how many people would trust you to say that, yes, indeed, there are some truths about Savarkar in this, facts, but there is also a story of Savarkar. Let me enjoy the book. Very few people right now are doing that, enjoying reading. You know, they want information out of it, so that possibly they can, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, you know. You're reading books so that you can glean some information, so that you can disseminate it on Twitter or any other place, or, you know, you can, sometimes it also is a game of one-upmanship. Somebody is given wrong facts, you read something to give the facts. So a book is almost, is become like a phone directory. It's become very impersonal. And that's a tragedy, because all the texts that you talked about, Mahabharata, Ramayana, they were very close to you. They were not just mere books. And when you talk about science, let me tell you why I enjoy writing, you know, fiction more than non-fiction, because in science, according to me, there is a clear demarcation between discovery and invention, you know. And I think it's a very beautiful demarcation. People discover things, scientists discover things all the time. But when you're discovering, please remember that thing already exists. You just found it. But when you're inventing, that thing did not exist. So which is, I mean, as a scientist or as a philosopher, you might think, which gives you more joy? To discover something or to invent something? And I think that's a very difficult question to answer. And there comes a time when you deal with a particular subject in science, where both of those streams in science, it's a very, I mean, you talked of Mahabharata, where fiction is intertwined with non-fiction. So I can say discovery is intertwined with invention. But there are some subjects in science where the demarcation is very, very thin, or very hard to, you know, disentangle. I'll give you a great example. Many people say Watson and Crick, you know, discovered the structure of DNA. They didn't discover it, because discovery would mean that, well, actually, technically they did, because they looked at the X-ray crystal structure of DNA, Rosalind Franklin's this thing, and then, so that is discovering the structure of DNA. That gives you a hint that it is double helical. But at that point of time, according to me, they invented the structure, because the double helical structure was not yet published, the X-ray structure. That would have been discovering. So they invented the double helical structure of DNA. Like that, there are so many streams. I mean, archaeologists are discovering things. But for example, Carey Mullis's invention of the polymerase chain reaction, everyone knows about RT-PCR during the COVID times. I mean, he got a Nobel Prize for it. That is an invention. That's not a discovery. The discovery is DNA polymerase that replicates the DNA, and so on and so forth. So there is a very clear-cut demarcation. As to your question, whether that has been transposed to the literary domain, yes, I would say yes, and I think we are poorer for it. We have started really demarcating. I mean, I would love for you to write a fictional account having Savarkar in it. I can't remember reading. Do you remember reading any story based on Savarkar as a fiction, as a novel? There aren't. Now, that's very strange, isn't it? I mean, it's a prominent historical figure.
Well, in regional languages, yeah, a lot of Indian languages there would be. But,
yeah, right. Whereas, I mean, if you look at Gandhi, I mean, there's huge fictional accounts starting with my experiments with truth. You know, so, sorry. You knew that was coming. No, but, or Nehru, for example. There are a lot of fictional accounts.
Like?
Discovery of India, to start with one. But, so this thing about invention and discovery. Now, let's take Naipaul as an example. I mean, one huge genre where he kind of, I would say, pioneered was travel writing, but then he mixed his own psychoanalysis of the place where he was going, or philosophical aspects of it, as a crystal ball gazing, I mean, Beyond the Belief or Among the Believers, and so many other books, Million Mutinies now, where he predicts what India is going to be. That is a genre of entirely non-fictional account of Naipaul going to a place, writing non-fictional, but it's actually, I mean, the term people use loosely is literary non-fiction, but it is more than just an account. So why do we not see more of that amongst the non-fiction writers?
No, I think it is changing now, this term of literary or narrative non-fiction. So I'll give you an example. Maybe with people like Savarkar, who are as it is contested and very, politically surcharged characters, it might be difficult to take, a lot of liberties. But in I'll just give an example from my, one of the earlier books I wrote on Gohar Jan. That was a safer topic. No one would really care about this person, who was actually India's first recorded artist on the gramophone. When gramophone and recording technology came to India in 1902, this was the person who first recorded for the gramophone company from London. So, in the Mysore Palace archives, where I was researching about her, there were all these documents that, she was a superstar, but then reduced to beggary and penury and so on. And she had taken shelter in the court of the Maharaja of Mysore in 1928. And there were all these letters that she had written to the Diwan of Mysore, to the Darbar Bakshi, saying, can you please, increase my salary? It's just 500 rupees. Can you not cut my income tax, because that is, I'm having to pay all my accompanying musicians with the same meager amount and all of that. And I'd gone to that place where she was given a little place to live in called Dilkush Cottage. It's a beautiful, stunning, place with a canopy of trees all over, and there's Chamundi hills in the background and all that. And she was very upset that she was given such, little, emolument. So in the opening to that book, with all this archival material, I just weaved in a story that there was a carriage that came across with the royal insignia of the Mysore royal family, which seemed to indicate that there was a very important guest sitting inside that carriage, and then it stopped in front of Dilkush, and out stepped a lady with and there were her photographs there, so I knew how she looked. So someone with a gold rimmed glass and a walking stick, and she came out limping, and then she read the letter which had this thing that you're given only 500 rupees, and then she throws it away in disgust and say, what do they take me for? Do they think I'm a whore who'll just take whatever they give me, and so on? And then she starts arranging all the luggage that she's brought along with her, and the maid drops the gramophone record of hers, and she's so devastated. And then she kind of looks at herself at that time in the mirror and sees that she has a disheveled hair, she has dark circles and all of that, and then she breaks down crying, saying, what have you done to your life? So I mean, that almost opens like a novel, but it is based on a lot of facts. It is based on the archival letters. It's based on the geography of the place that this person lived in. It doesn't take away much from the content, but it just makes for the problem you cited. It makes for interesting reading, which is what I think narrative nonfiction is all about, which kind of intertwines what we spoke about. May not be in that fantastic a manner as our epics did, but somehow it tries to intertwine storytelling with non-fiction. This whole idea that non-fiction needs to be boring, needs to be insipid, it's just a catalogue of facts, I think that strips it away of all the interest and the rasa that is there in that.
And I completely agree with you. And I think this is where I want to bring in a question which, when we throw it open to the audience as well, I'd like their response as well, because my younger sister is looking at the bell right now. She's already given me, but I think we have 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so. Older sister. You talked about interweaving of fiction with non-fiction. I'll give you an example why the audience is so polarized that they understand the non-fiction part of it, but they want to use the fictional part as a stick to beat you with. Let me take another example. I mean, you talked about Gohar Jan. That required a lot of indulgence of the readers. And I dare say, because She was a non-controversial figure. So readers indulged in the subject. Not so the case with Kashmir Files. The Kashmir Files is based on real events that actually transpired. Those are completely non-fictional events. They happened. The genocide happened. The ethnic cleansing happened. The the Nadim Agh massacre happened. Girija Tiku's thing happened. Mr. Ganju was shot dead, and the rice laced with his blood was fed to his. All those are real instances. From the rooftops of mosques, Pandits, you go but leave your women behind, Nizamim, all those things are true. And yet, when a story is woven through these non-fictional true accounts, Kashmir Files is branded as vulgar propaganda, as fake. Still, and it's not just the people who hate Vivek Agnihotri, there's a long list of those, are saying this. His own contemporary, his peers. I saw a real obnoxious interview of an obnoxious man. So it's to the power of two. Prakash Raj. It was so sad to, he is pillorying his own peer by saying that guy is a propagandist, is a horrible, vulgar film, and, it's all fake and everything. That's what I'm saying. So readers are not, they are actually... So the writer has intertwined fiction with non-fiction to tell a tale that is woven around the non-fictional events. Rather than the readers appreciating that, they've actually disentangled it. And they are using the fictional account as a stick to beat the thing. So isn't that a dangerous territory?
No, Anand, but tell me, if forget a film, if Vivek Agnihotri had made a documentary film, would they have accepted it then as just a catalogue of facts? If you don't want to accept something, whether you show it as a fiction or a non-fiction, your opponent is not going to take that, right? Of course, as you rightly said, here it becomes an easy stick to beat him with. Another eminent historian who has always been a cricket commentator, actually in a recent interview said it's the Amit Shah, Vivek Agnihotri school of historiography. So that is the disparaging attitude that is taken.
He's the same historian who said Shivaji was a regional leader and there should not be any road named on Shivaji.
Yeah. Much more than just a regional leader. He said many other things which we should not quote here.
Yes.
But if it was a documentary film only laced with facts and no fiction, do you think those who have an agenda against India or have a narrative about Kashmir would have actually accepted and said, oh, now we'll accept it because it's only facts? That's either way. If you don't want to accept something, you will not, isn't it?
So what's the solution here? You can't write fiction without being pilloried. You can't write non-fiction without being pilloried. You mix the two and then you're pilloried. What does a writer do?
Grow a thick hide to get pilloried all the time and understand that you're doing what you're doing with the courage of your conviction and with a clear conscience. And I think the solution that way is, fiction needs to have, if it is, based on real facts and so on, it needs to be well researched. On the other side, non-fiction needs to be made interesting and presented as a story. The research should be very, very meticulous, but it should be accessible. What is the point of having well-researched tomes which, gather dust in some library shelf? It has to reach out to the common people who would like to read it. Pick it up from an airport bookshelf and read even what is heavy-duty history or geopolitics or whatever. So I think that is the only way, which in some way we're now intertwining the two, where fiction, historical fiction needs to be well researched. It can't be completely made up. Non-fiction needs to be made interesting. And the third solution is, as I said, not be so sensitive to what every dog that barks on the street, what do they say?
Yeah. But, so here let me ask you a question that I'm sure, right, I'm not the first one to ask this question, because I'm certain a lot of people from the film world would want to make a authoritative film on Savarkar.
Not at all, because I don't think Bollywood would even want to touch Savarkar with a barge pole. And yeah,
No
unfortunately,
one has approached you for film
they
rights?
have, but then not the serious kind of filmmakers, at least not the mainstream Bollywood.
Because my question was, how comfortable would you be to see Savarkar's story that you have written intertwined with a fictional account that weaves into the facts of Savarkar?
A love
Because
affair
films
thrown
usually-
somewhere.
Correct.
And yeah. No, I think that would be quite unfortunate to do that, because maybe a new character can be introduced in the plot with Savarkar's life being very sacrosanct, because that is
So
based
you
on
yourself
facts.
don't like fiction being interwoven with non-fiction?
No, I mean, you can't you can't make up things about a person who is a very real person, right? I mean, yeah, a love affair which didn't exist. How can you just say it is also defamatory? His grandson can go and sue you in court that you've brought up these, and that's not fiction. That is sleaze. So, or anything like that. That is not acceptable. But yeah, fictional elements could be a friend of his who actually did not exist. The main character needs to be what it is, but the circumstances in which they operated, that could perhaps be fictionalized a bit, right?
Yeah, but then again, I mean, I completely get you. You can't do that sort of thing now. What I wanted to...
Well, we had the recent film where Gandhi and Godse, where apparently I have not seen the film, but I think those who saw, and some of you might have, it speaks about how Gandhi and Godse actually have a conversation with each other and thrash out their differences or whatever. Gandhi survives the assassination attempt and then tries to meet Godse, and then both of them get a hearing. Now, this is in some way a redemption for Godse, whose voice was never heard, though he gave his testimony in court, a very, very elaborate 80-page...
Which was banned by Nehru, by the way.
Banned for several years till the 1970s. This gives him a chance to probably speak his voice. And probably we've not even heard Gandhi's defense of all the allegations that Godse and people of his ideological tilt had against him. So that way there is some way, a reconstruction of a historical problem where the two characters somehow reconcile.
But this is what I mean, Vikram, because you've written the biography of Savarkar so authoritative. Every fact about him, every truism, everything that happened, you have not only catalogued it, you have told it to the world. Now, transpose yourself to thousands of years ago when you talked about that a lot of fictional stories have been interwoven with non-fictional accounts in Ramayana and Mahabharata. So the lords, the gods and goddesses have been, their stories have also been fictionalized. They did this, they did that, all those things. But now you're saying that don't do it with Savarkar. Why? Because you have given his true factual picture. Had you not done it, people would have written things about Savarkar, interwoven fiction with non-fiction.
Not true. I mean, you ask my personal opinion, I would be a little uncomfortable because as I'm so close to the facts, but then stories around these people as the background and around that making a story is what historical fiction is all about. Yeah. And translating that to celluloid is what a period film probably does.
Right. I mean the film that won 8 Oscars, Gandhi.
Yes.
A lot of fictional elements in that actually never happened. Yeah, I mean, so out of 3 hours, I would say 2 hours and 59 minutes was pure fiction, which is the opportune moment to throw it open to the audience if they have any questions. Please, yeah. Sure.
My question is Anand Ranganathan, sir. So one of the strongest allegations,
would you like a mic?
You will hear me?
Yes.
So, sir, one of the strongest allegations that people in general, right, throw against us, that's the Indic or the right wing, is associating us with pseudoscience. So whatever these people talk, pseudoscience, right? So like they throw around a lot of pseudoscience. So whatever they talk is rubbish.
Pseudoscience, like we believe Earth is flat?
No. Not like that, right? See, my point is that yes, there were like MPs from the ruling party and all who spoke some things that is you can associate, like when say that's pseudoscience and all that. So they use that as the strongest bullet to rubbish whatever is spoken from the. So how do you counter that, sir? As a scientist yourself, how do you counter that?
It's very easy because, as I say, it's very easy to expose the hypocrisy. There was one lady who, belonged to a particular religion, and she was mocking a minister who did not believe in evolution. And I said, that's very funny because you believe that your prophet went on a winged horse. You believe that water turned into wine. You believe the earth is flat, the moon was split in two, and yet you are saying that fellow doesn't believe in evolution. You mocking him. So, yeah, I mean, if you believe in all those miracles, then how can you mock someone who believes in another miracle? So, I mean, for me, that's a.
So this, what you're talking about, is not exactly like the people from the left wing, right? Typically, they say that we are the intellectual class and all that, right? They are like who are atheists and this one, right? So when they do that, like how do you counter it, like? Right? I'm not talking about what you're talking is like people belonging to the Christian, this one and all that, right? But people who are atheists or claim to be rationalists. So.
Right. So please make a distinction between the leftists who say they are atheists and the true atheists who are Darwinian atheists. Leftists are not atheists, they are cultists. They belong to a religion that was, their God is Marx. So they are wrong all the time, not just most of the time.
See, a short comment and two questions, one for each of you. Very interesting discussion on fiction, non-fiction coming together. And I'd like to draw the attention of the audience to a fictional work written by two very prominent chemists, Roald Hoffman and Carl Gerasi.
We have a booming voice.
No, see, the book is called Oxygen, and it was written by Roald Hoffman and Carl Gerasi, both extremely prominent chemists. It is clearly a fictional work. There were three chemists in the 18th century who were involved in the discovery of oxygen. This was Scheele in Sweden, Priestley in England, and Lavoisier in France. And all three of them played a part in discovering this element, oxygen. So the fictional story is, suppose Nobel Prizes existed in those days. Which of these three fellows would have got the Nobel Prize? So I think a thing like that is clearly fiction because there was no Nobel Prize at that time. And yet the whole thing, and Hoffman himself got a Nobel Prize. And Gerasi narrowly missed getting a Nobel Prize. So there was a particular poignancy in this fictional work. But there is fiction, there is non-fiction, and the whole thing comes together in a way in which it is very difficult to define this work as even fiction or non-fiction. I think this is something that in the context of this particular discussion is very interesting. Now, two short questions. You said when you write a biography, you have to be sort of in love with the subject, which I mostly agree with. Now, I want to ask you, if a person writes an autobiography, is he or she in love with himself or herself? That's my question to you. And Anand, the question for you is, are you really sure that Crick and Watson invented DNA?
Yes, that's a great question, and I put in the rider because Watson had seen the diffraction pattern of the DNA, of Rosalind Franklin. So you can say the invention part was much less than the discovery part. But it is also a fact that they brought in a lot of Chagaff's, discovery that A and T are the same amount and C and G are the same amount. So there was a lot of things that would have gone in had they not seen the diffraction pattern of the DNA that showed it to be double helical. They would have invented the structure. I mean, Pauling, for example, invented the structure of DNA and he got it completely wrong. I mean, the Pauling structure that came in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, if not in the same issue, in the same volume of Nature, where Watson and Crick structure came, and Pauling got it completely wrong. I mean, the bases are flying out, and the phosphorus, the chain is actually in the middle. It should be at the end of the both things. So people get the invention part wrong spectacularly, not so much the discovery part, because you can't get the discovery part wrong because you're discovering something. It's already, it existed. As to the, the next question was.
Well, that's a very interesting line of thought which I'd never really, thought about. I do think now on reflection from the question that an autobiographer is a very narcissistic person who thinks that his or her story is so worthwhile that it needs to be committed to print. I don't know how objective and honest one can be, because Emily Wordsworth had said, abyss has no biographer. The lowest points of our lives, we somehow keep it, or the things that we are ashamed of ourselves, we probably don't even document it, and we want it to, as we discussed earlier, die with us. So as long as it is not an attempt at self-glorification and the same kind of dispassion that I'd spoken about, which is a prerequisite for a biographer, if the same thing happens in an autobiography, I think then it would transcend narcissism. Just like there, it would transcend the borders of hagiography.
If I can add to that, that's a very pertinent question, because I can't think of very many autobiographers who've actually been so true and who've given an absolute ruthlessly objective account. I think you have to be completely mad in order to do that. Not to care, or to do tyaga. I think then you can, but even then I'm not very sure. Only one name comes to mind, Pasolini, the famous film director. I mean, he was actually a bit mad, so he was so true that it was revolting what he explained, what he had done in his life. Gandhi comes very close, I'll be very honest with you, because some of the things that he said he's going to do, even Rajaji said, Rajagopalaji, Gandhiji, please do it, but please don't say it to the world that you are doing it. But Gandhi wrote about it. For example, sleeping with Manu and Abha, he said, I want to write about that. I mean, you have to enter that mad zone in order to do that. But people who are sensible and rational, it's very difficult to be that objective. And I'll give you a great example. One of the greatest books by Naipaul is actually The Enigma of Arrival. It is a novel, but it is 100% non-fiction. And how do you know that? Because Naipaul himself talks about it, and his biographer in Naipaul's biography, I forget the name, is very good. The World is What It Is. I forget the name of the biographer. So it's very clear. Everything about that novel is non-fiction. But Naipaul gets scared because in that the protagonist is a wife beater, which Naipaul was. The protagonist goes to, prostitutes, which Naipaul did. All the things that Naipaul did, he makes the protagonist do. And that is where the non-fictional account becomes a fictional account. It's very beautiful.
So we have actually run out of time.
We've run out of time. All right. Thank you very much for your time.